Mutant Chronicles, Fiction, The Apostle of Insanity Trilogy, Volume 3, Dementia, by Michael A. Stackpole. Chapter 36. The return flight from Themis to Mars would have taken us 19 days if we had traveled at the approved speeds dictated by transportation contracts, safety standards for spaceships, and the common conception of prudence. Throughout the history of mankind, our machines have always been able to perform at higher standards than the human body could stand, or human society thought correct. Allowable speeds within the solar system had been determined not by the capability of the spacecraft, but by bureaucrats' ideas that interplanetary travel should have some logical analog to terrestrial timescales. This meant interplanetary travel could be slow. As the Coulson showed by its impact with Themis, flying a spaceship at excessive speeds in a crowded area of space can be extremely dangerous. The Coulson hit Themis dead on, shattering the planetoid like an ice cube hit by a sledgehammer. Ash had pulled us up and away from Themis on a vector that closely paralleled the Coulson's incoming course. As a result, while we got to watch a brilliant explosion on the aft monitor view screens, we escaped being peppered by debris. Because of the collision, we declared a medical emergency, and the cartel gave us immediate clearance to return to Luna instead of Mars. They also advised us to proceed with all dispatch. I let Ash push the ship as fast as it could go, considering that a good definition of all dispatch. He matched the accepted speed used on the run from the asteroid belt to Jupiter, turning what should have been a month-long trip to Earth into something that took just less than a day to accomplish. We landed at the Fernaria spaceport on Luna, and the Brotherhood immediately impounded the ship. I recovered Ash's brain and returned it to his body. My brother, who had returned to Luna to face disciplinary actions for letting us use the Coulson to get to Themis, met us at the spaceport with a vehicle and some basic medical supplies. Titus Gallicus ran interference from my brother and me while we got Sandra out and safely ensconced in my apartment. We decided that was the safest place for her in the short term, because Winchester Raleigh did not know who I really was. When he learned Sandra and the rest of us had survived the Coulson's collision with Themis, we expected a reaction, but figuring out where we had stashed Sandra would be all but impossible for him. Wendy Levine, Jan, and Ash remained there to watch over her. Nick, Titus, and I met covertly in Luna City to discuss the implications of all we had learned since we left Luna, and came up with a rudimentary plan for eliminating the threats to Sandra's safety once and for all. I immediately headed off to Cybertronic headquarters and enlisted both Ms. Wickersham and Dr. Carter in the plot. They did their parts, but I waited until I had confirmation from both Titus and Nick that things had gone well before I went subreal to face the music for my actions. The bemused expression on Carl's face surprised me, because I expected him to be angry. Instead of meeting me at the simulation of his Martian retreat, he wove around himself a replica of my apartment. With feeds he was getting from Jan and Ash, he let me keep an eye on Sandra's treatment, and I appreciated that. Am I to gather that you approve of my actions? Carl shrugged and dropped himself into my favorite chair. Since your discovery of who you were, and even before that, I would have said you were clever, and since your total reintegration, I find you positively insidious. That doesn't really answer my question. I know I can't answer the question until I satisfy myself as to how much of what you have done was done for Sandra Lorry, or Cybertronic, or for yourself. Or some combination thereof. Carl shook his head. Others might consider your actions as having eliminated 2 bugs of this one line of code, but you and I know each other too well to know that is true. Instead of having your brother forge and plant a transfer order ceding the Coulson to Rory's Transportation Division of Capital, a move that will surely end Raleigh's career, you could have simply created another new identity for Sandra and had her hidden away again. He never could have touched her. I frowned. We tried that once, and Raleigh learned she was alive. That's the reason Raleigh met me outside my brother's apartment and transported me to a place where Brotherhood Inquisitors, including Scythia Scipio, questioned me about her location. If Wynn had learned how to break the identity we set up for her once, he could do it again.
Ah, but he hadn't learned that trick at all.
Carl gestured and a copy of the Chronicles appeared in his hand.
Monsignor Ellsworth used personal ads to remain in contact with you after he and Sandra had gone to Venus, correct?
Yes, but he used the Citizen, not the Chronicles.
To send messages to you, yes, but he used the Chronicles to send messages to Winchester Roddy.
What?
I reviewed Ellsworth's files from Capitol. Your assessment that he was a very nice guy is confirmed by every evaluation he ever had on the job. His supervisors noted that he was a conciliator and peacemaker.
Carl smiled weakly.
He was too nice for his own good.
Of course. I slapped my forehead with my hand. Munsinger would have hated the fact that Sandra and her father were estranged. He used the Chronicles to send a message to Wynn, and that alerted Wynn to the fact that his daughter was still alive. But with Raleigh's ties to the Brotherhood, he should have been able to learn where Munsinger and Sandra had gone.
Should have, but apparently did not.
Carl tossed the paper over his shoulder, and it dissolved into static before sinking into the dark screen of my television.
The Chronicles are managed by one or more conservative factions within the Brotherhood. Wynn's connections came with a spur group, and cooperation between the two groups was not good enough to get the data he wanted. I suspect the Chronicles group withheld the information to use at a later date to co-opt Winchester for their own purposes.
So Winchester used the resources of his friends to try to break me. I nodded slowly. From me, he got nothing, and Scythia must have been convinced that I was the one who had made all the arrangements concerning the move. That, or he didn't want to make a move against Nick for Anna's sake.
That's possible, though it is more likely his friends in the Brotherhood urged caution upon him and were working for a year and a half on getting at the Chronicles information about Munsinger. There were more messages to you and him during that period after your death. Winchester obeyed his handlers, but Sandra had been promised him as a reward for his continued status as a sleeper agent within Capitol.
Well, then taking him down was an advantage for Cybertronic. It cuts the Brotherhood's power in another corporation, and that should relieve some of the pressure against us. I smiled. See, I did it for Cybertronic.
That is possible, but you're smart enough to see that having Winchester on a string could have been useful for us as well. Taking him out of play means no one benefits from his position. Still, I am willing to allow that you did think that was the only way to protect Sandra.
I nodded. Sandra's protection and recovery is important to me. My brother had gotten Wendy Levine detached from the Capitol military and reassigned to his division so she can help treat Sandra.
Where will you send her?
I shook my head. I don't know. My brother is making the initial arrangements, and he's also teaching Wendy enough that she'll be able to drop both of them out of sight whenever she thinks it's necessary. I don't know and will never know, which is the only way I can guarantee her safety. If you don't think that's in Cybertronic's best interest, I don't care. It had to be done. Carl held his hands up.
I understand and appreciate your situation concerning Sandra. My only regret is that if we could have been some aid in her rehabilitation, her going underground will prevent us from being able to help.
The key, Carl, is that she knows how to reach us, not the other way around. Wendy's got a good head on her shoulders. If she needs help, she'll ask.
Very good.
Carl inspected a fingernail, then smiled slyly at me.
Now, about what you have done to Scythia.
Another threat to Cybertronic, gone.
Ah, I see.
He clearly did not believe me.
I very much like your method of handling her. You've got her fingerprints on the knife with which you killed John's partner in Capitol Security, and you had the body thawed out. There should even be blood residue on the knife. I take it Titus Gallicus is investigating the murder.
I nodded. It's part of an overall inquiry into the Eternal Vigilance faction within the Brotherhood.
Did you decide on a motive?
The guy was a go-between who carried messages to Scythia from Win Raleigh. She killed him to sever that connection. Spur-of-the-moment thing, she's known for having a temper.
But would she be stupid enough to have left a weapon with her fingerprints on it lying around where it could be discovered?
I think you'll find that Titus, visiting his friend after our return from Themis, walked in on her as she was trying to dispose of the body. He was forced to kill her when she attacked him to cover her tracks.
Undead women dispute no frames.
Something like that. The Brotherhood is anxious to purge the Eternal Vigilance faction, so they'll accept anything right now. Case closed. Carl frowned.
Titus Gallicus is willing to participate in this conspiracy.
He is. I told him how the man died, self-defense, and that I knew Scythia had murdered someone else at Win Raleigh's orders. I also told him I had no evidence to back up my charge against her. He'd seen Scythia execute the Abbot of Eternal Vigilance, and heard her offer to kill Sandra on Themis, so he had no doubts as to her homicidal tendencies. The conspiracy brings Scythia to justice and cuts off inquiry into many more potentially damaging things. Besides, I shrugged. If not for me and Cybertronic, all of us would have died at Eternal Vigilance, and again on Themis. Titus Gallicus pays his debts.
And you collect yours.
Do I? Carl nodded slowly.
Well, you've done some excellent work in safeguarding Cybertronic. I noticed that the man who ordered your interrogation and death is now in disgrace and will never be able to recover. Your executioner is dead, framed for a killing you did.
And your point is? Carl stood and extended his hand to me.
I think, Mr. Quinton Kell, you will have a great future here at Cybertronic.
Epilogue. The Independent Citizen, Thursday, April 17th. Personal ads. Rex, 2 years is a long time to take to say thanks, but I've had a lot to learn. Thanks. Remember Anna's birthday is a week away. Love, Lorraine. Mutant Chronicles, Fiction, The Apostle of Insanity Trilogy, Volume 3, Dementia, by Michael A. Stackpole.